ID card to be carried, which basically will replace your state driver's license. Georgia is already working on passing some of the legislation to comply with the Real ID Act. You know, the fact is, though, that's not very much different than Nazi Germany in the 1920s and 30s when people were asked, let me see your papers. We're not too far off from that today. Washington has its hands in our lives in a myriad of ways. One of the issues that's facing Georgia right now, and has been for the last several years, is the issue of water rights. As you probably know, Georgia and our surrounding states have been undergoing this water crisis now for several years. Things are a little bit better this year, thankfully. But the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, because they dug the hole for Lake Lanier and some of the other reservoirs across the state, they're claiming that they have the right to decide what we will do with our own water. And now, even some of our elected officials here in Georgia are saying that maybe we ought to just let Congress decide. Well, let me tell you, anytime the federal government steps in to provide a solution for something, they're not going to provide a good solution. It's always going to end up being more problems than what we had to start with. Now, let me tell you what a true states' rights governor would say to the federal government about this water situation. A true states' rights governor would say, okay, you dug the hole. Fine. The hole in the ground that you dug belongs to you. But every drop of water that the good Lord put in that hole belongs to the people of the sovereign state of Georgia, and we will decide for ourselves what we will do with our water and every other one of our natural resources. That's what a true states' rights governor would say. I do think that as a Christian, we have a responsibility to be a good neighbor and to practice good stewardship with our water and our other natural resources. I think we're obligated to sit down at the table with the governors of Tennessee, Alabama, and Florida. But I do not think that allowing the federal government at any level to make the decision about our water supply is the right solution to the problem. One of the other problems that we have with Washington today is that they think that they have the right to infringe upon all of our other liberties, even the ones enumerated in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. How many of you in here believe that the Second Amendment is an important right that we as Americans have? All the men in here, and most of the ladies too, raising your hands. You know, several years ago, though, during the Hurricane Katrina crisis in the Gulf Coast region, we had, during that time of disaster, there were literally federal agents, FEMA and otherwise, who were going around in the Gulf Coast region literally trying to confiscate the weapons of law-abiding citizens in those areas. And this was during a time when they were, their communication lines were down. Those people were not able to get in touch with their local peace officers if they wanted to, if they needed to. A whole host of problems. People were going through parts of the country, pillaging, looting, vandalizing. And these people literally had to depend upon themselves to protect their lives, liberty, and property because the local law enforcement couldn't get there if they needed them to. And these federal agents were going around trying to disarm, confiscate the weapons of law-abiding citizens, some of whom even had weapons permits in their respective states. Now, thankfully, there were some sheriffs in some of the counties and parishes across that area that stood up to the federal agents and literally stepped in between the people and the federal agents that were trying to disarm their people and said, no, you're not going to disarm our people. There were several instances where sheriffs and deputies even reportedly drew their weapons on federal agents who were trying to disarm and infringe upon the liberties of American citizens. Now, let me just tell you what a true states' rights governor in any of those states would have said. And it's the same thing that I've already gone on record with Fox 5 News in Atlanta as saying. Immediately upon taking office, I will let Washington know that the first time any federal agent tries to disarm one law-abiding citizen in my state, that federal agent's going to find himself sitting in a Georgia jail waiting for somebody to come bail him out. Now that's what a states' rights governor is. You say, well, can you do that? I mean, after all, they're the federal government. You know, not only can we do that, that is the constitutional obligation that your governor has as the chief executive of the state. It is the responsibility and the privilege of the governor to stand up for the people's liberties. against no matter from where the attacks upon our liberties come, whether it's from terrorists in a faraway place or if it's right here a lot closer to home in Washington, D.C. Your governor has the responsibility as the highest constitutional officer in the state to stand up for the people's liberties and interpose himself between the people and their liberties and that out-of-control federal government. Let me talk to you for just a couple of minutes, if I could, about our rights and where our rights come from and why we have states' rights here in America. The truth is that all of us have rights because rights ultimately come from God. The Creator is the source of all rights. He has all rights, He has all authority, and He's the one that created us. And when God chose to create Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, which I personally believe is a literal story, when He chose to do that, He gave Adam and Eve some, not all, but some of the rights and authorities that He Himself possessed. He told them to do several things there in the Garden of Eden. He told them to dress and keep the garden. He told them to be good stewards. He told them to name the animals. He gave them some, but not all, of His authority as His stewards here on earth. So God has all authority. He's given man as individuals some, but not all, of His authority, only those powers that He delegated to us. And then individual men and women came together here in our American system and voluntarily formed the states, our state governments, and gave the states some, but not all, of the rights and authorities that we as individual citizens have when we formed our states. Originally 13 states, now 50. But when we did that, you didn't give up all of your rights as an individual to the state government even. You still have rights and authority over yourself and your family that the state government doesn't have a right to. So the state only has that limited amount of authority and rights that the individuals voluntarily gave to it. Then the states, as you know, compacted together, formed the Constitution of these United States, and created the federal government, giving the federal government some, but not all, of the power and authority that the states held. So they transferred part of their power to the federal government. So God's at the top of the totem pole. He has all power, all authority. He's given some of that to individuals, men and women. Those individuals then have given some of theirs to the states, and the states have given some, but not all, of their authority and power to the federal government. Now let me ask you a question. In the way things are laid out and who gave who authority in this structure, God's at the top. Who's at the bottom? The federal government. Now, if you talk to most of the bureaucrats in Washington today, they'll tell you that it's the other way around. Not only do they think that the federal government's supposed to be above the states and above the individual, if you talk to them long enough, you'll find out that most of them really believe that it ought to take the place of Almighty God Himself. And that is the place that the federal government tries to assume over our lives today. But our founding fathers were very wise, and they gave us the Constitution, which very clearly defines the scope of power of the federal government. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lays out very clearly what the federal government can and cannot do over our lives. It's a very short, very simple list. But of course, they've overstepped the boundaries. They're in violation of the contract with the states today. They've broken the contract, and it's the responsibility of the states to stand up for the people and say, you're in violation of the contract. You see, when the states created the federal government, the states, therefore, are the masters in the arrangement. The federal government is supposed to be the servant of the states, not the other way around. Let me give you a very good example of that. Very early on, after the Constitution had first been ratified and gone into effect, Georgia had to lead the way very early on in the movement of states' rights and state sovereignty. There was an individual from another state who tried to sue the state of Georgia in the federal courts. This was, I believe, 1798. The case was Chisholm versus Georgia. And Mr. Chisholm took his case to the federal courts, and the federal courts told the state of Georgia, you must come and appear before us so that we can hear the matter and rule on the case.